Zionism has been damaged in this country, especially among younger people, both on the left and the right, especially on the left, but on the right too. There's interesting polls that have come out and showed that there's really been a diminution of support for Israel among younger Americans on all across the political spectrum. But Zionism remains a very powerful force in this country. And I think Zionists of all stripes, whether they're Christian Zionists, secular Zionists, Jewish Zionists, they will support this. And they unfortunately have a disproportionate amount of power. They control the commanding heights of the culture and of the economy. And so, at least in the short or medium term, I think there will be support. But it is dangerous. I mean, it's just like, again, when you rip the veil off, it just inevitably there are going to be people who were on the fence, or maybe even people that were somewhat thought they believed in Zionism, but then they started, wait a second, I don't know that I believe in this. And I think inevitably it's going to be damaging to the Zionist project here in this country. But at the present, it's just like there's just so much support, and it's so well entrenched in the establishment that that what he's saying is going to be supported.
Do you think most Christian Zionists really do have an understanding of what Zionism is what it's really all about? Or is it just a very superficial understanding that, oh, my pastor told me that this was the land of the Jews, so we support it?
Yeah.
Is it pretty superficial like that? Or do they know what's happening? Because, I mean, just the destruction of Christianity within the Holy Land is what is also happening. One of the oldest churches in the Christian churches in the world was bombed very early on in the campaign in Gaza. This is not good for Christianity in the region as a Christian. So it's
Yeah, well, and I'd like to point out too that in southern Lebanon, it was like a tomb of St. Peter as a place that by tradition has been revered as a tomb of St. Peter by Christians for many, many centuries, and by Muslims too, who actually do revere St. Peter as well. That was bombed by the Israelis. There was a cross on a mountain, in Syria that was a pilgrimage site for Christians for many, many centuries, and the Israelis destroyed it. I think they've learned that there's no repercussions unfortunately, among so many, let's say, evangelicals and especially Christian Zionists. They don't really regard Arab Christians as real Christians. That's a sad truth. Orthodox, whether Orthodox or Catholic, or they just don't know, because this is not something that's reported widely. I think a lot of them probably even now would be surprised to learn that there are Christians, ancient Christian communities in these places. Unfortunately, the numbers of Christians has been dropping drastically over the last several decades, because of the Zionist onslaught, in large part because of the Zionist onslaught. But yeah, they just don't even, many of them don't know. Unfortunately, some do know and just don't seem to care. I think a lot of them, I'm sure that many of them are good people and are actually otherwise good Christians, and they just don't understand what's going on. But some of them, from their language, do to some extent, and they seem to have kind of adopted the bloodthirsty views of the Jewish Zionists. There's clearly quite a few Christian Zionists that just aren't bothered with the fact that all kinds of Palestinians, including women and children, are being killed.
How do the Israelis view Christians in the land? I mean, do they make just a distinction? They just hate all Arabs in the area equally, whether they're Christian or Muslim, or is there more enmity towards Christians in the area? Because I see these things like, they believe Jesus is, burning in hell and excrement. I see these things and them spitting at the cross. And I wonder if is there more hatred towards Christians in the area by the Israelis, or a lot of the Zionists are just secular and we just want everybody out. Doesn't matter. We don't care if you're
Christian, I don't know if there's
Muslim.
any more hatred for Christians than there is for Muslims. I think by and large, they probably, like at least within, it seems like over time, they become less and less careful about, or less and less restrained about their actions against Christian Arabs. Initially, like one of the reasons that the fairly large Christian community remained in what's now Israel, I believe it was Nazareth. There was a large Christian community there, and during the Nakba, the part of the ethnic cleansing campaign that was the Nakba back in 1948 included driving the Christians out of Nazareth. But then they got a phone call from somebody who said, don't do that, because the thing is, like everybody, all Americans, Christians understand what Nazareth is. This is, they don't know really much about your country, but if they learn that you're driving Christians out of Nazareth, that's going to hurt you. So they actually let them back in. But it seems like over time, they have shown less and less restraint in attacking, because, as I mentioned, the attack on the tomb of St. Peter, on the cross on the mountain in Syria. They've learned that, well, because Christianity in this country has undergone a transformation where, the old line, the mainline denominations that did have, and the Catholics were part of that, and then some of the major Protestant denominations like the Lutherans, they still did have some sort of connection or, identification with the Christians in the Middle East and would speak out, but they have declined relative to these new denominations that have a very large Christian Zionist component. And so these Christian Zionists, to be honest, either they just don't seem to care. And, it's just, they're so fixated on bringing them, moving the end times forward, bringing about the second coming through this a sequence of events that they imagine need to happen. And a part of that is the creation of a greater Israel. And so they don't care if Christians get killed in the process. Yeah, let's be honest.
Right. I asked that question just because if you think about it historically, the Jews were persecuted under Christian nations. When they look back, if they talk about the pogroms and things like this, we're talking about European countries. I feel like historically there wasn't really much beef between Jews and Muslims, or is that not true? So that's why I was wondering, like, are they kind of this,
right?
From the European, the Holocaust, the pogroms, they come back here, like, we part of being Jewish is your resistance to Christianity, to, like that's part of what it was. So I was wondering if that had something to do with it, but I don't know.
Yeah. It doesn't really make sense for me. That history has been forgotten. I mean, and now that, the main supporters of Israel are in Europe and the United States, among nominal Christians. And, you can't say that the Muslims didn't persecute Jews, but certainly like in recent history, let's say like we're talking about the Ottoman Empire that ruled the area for quite a long time. You didn't find anything comparable to some of the persecutions in Europe, especially under Hitler. But that's, it seems like that just doesn't matter. It's a new world, and they have new alliances and new enemies.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. I promise to only take 1 minute of your time. If you're using AI, please consider checking out my website, novlisky.io. So what we built here at Novlisky is an AI hub. It allows you to access hundreds of AI models. We update them as soon as a new model comes out. It is integrated into our system, and you can use them all under one platform. And another thing that's so great about this website is that you can easily use multiple models at the same time to compare which is best for whatever use case. So for example, I'm going to use Anthropic and GPT-4 at the same time. So I get side-by-side results. I use this in my work every single day. I think you'll find it incredibly useful. There's tons of customizations. We have an iOS and Android native app as well. So you have seamless synchronization across all devices. So please check it out. I think it's something you'll find incredibly useful. There are no subscription fees, no rate limits. I guarantee you it's going to save you money, and it's just going to keep you on top of all AI releases.
I wonder, I just feel like this everything that's happening in the Middle East with Gaza and Israel, I feel like this is something that really can tear America apart. And the path that Trump's going down is scary. Because he's making these comments about Gaza, first of all, just the open land grab that we're going to own it. But he also uses this language like, look at the place. It's completely destroyed. It's unlivable. It's a demolition site. He keeps on saying that, which is like, you do realize that that's because it's our bombs that we're giving to Israel to drop on them.
Right.
And now you're saying, you're giving evidence to what most of the world, I would say, pretty much the whole world agrees is a genocide, right? I mean, is that fair to say? Do the majority of the world, I think only Americans don't, the majority...
Well, and some Western European governments, certainly.
Yeah, governments,
especially Germany.
In terms of, but just the majority populations of every country. I think the majority populations of every single country, except the United States,
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, maybe that it's not quite a majority in some European countries, but there's at least a substantial minority that recognizes, the Israeli actions as a genocide.
I understand, genocide is a very polarizing word, but it's something that a lot of people say it's starting to look a little bit like genocide. It doesn't. It's being associated with that at least. So whether you want to say mass murder, ethnically cleansing, it's clearly not a good look. But he's making these open statements about just the state of Gaza, and we realize the world is like, you did that. You do realize, Trump, if you're sitting there with Netanyahu saying, oh, man, it's so terrible. They can't live there. It's unbelievable. It's like, it's you two, these two guys, it's not relation point at Trump. It was Biden before, but, it will continue under Trump. So there's no self-reflection on that.
Yeah. And then it's very true.
Right. So, and then I'm just thinking, we had, Joe Biden was getting that nickname Genocide Joe, and I just think like Trump, you want to be associated with this too, become Genocide Trump if this comes along. And then it makes me think about what will happen to Christianity in this country, in America, where if it's tied to a genocide of the Holy Land, of the people of the Holy Land. It's
it could have huge repercussions. It could there's no question about it.
Do you think it could kill, basically, end or change what? I mean, I don't even know what Christianity really would be in this country at some point. Will it change? I mean, you feel like Europe really isn't so much of a Christian continent anymore,
right?
And then the U.S. is kind of this. I'm going off into into the weeds a little bit, but it feels like it's something different here in the United States. It's not it doesn't feel like a Christian nation, and it's evolved.
I think we clearly aren't a Christian nation. We're a post-Christian nation. There are a lot of nominal Christians. I don't want to judge it. I consider Christian Zionism to be a very serious deformation of the Christian faith. And it's not consistent with the historical Christian faith. It's a very recent invention. And I think it's a real black mark on Christianity. And as you say, I think over time, as the true horror of this becomes increasingly obvious and maybe eventually just undeniable, even to some of the most extreme advocates of Zionism, people will become aware of what these nominal Christians have associated themselves with, and many of those Christians, we hope too, will become aware of it. And there will be huge repercussions. I'm not going to even pretend to say what it will be, but it's there.
And you think it will happen, right? I mean, this is something that we're marching down this road. Right.
It's not going to end the way they imagine it. Jesus isn't going to come and establish an earthly kingdom in Israel after, the greater Israel has been established. That's just not going to happen. It's going to be a very ugly ending, whatever it is. And I think, there's a great deal of rationalization. There has been all along, but at some point, maybe even the most avid rationalizer on behalf of Christian Zionism will have to give up, and we'll see. That'll be a real sea change, a real earthquake, a cultural and political earthquake in this country, because it's so much a part of the landscape. It's just so much a part of the American identity now. But yeah, at some point, that's where I think we're headed to that earthquake.
Is there a way we can get off that? I mean, I think it's just if we could stand up to Israel, right? I think that's the only way.
Right. Well, there was just a little bit of hope, which we've talked about, because Trump has that forceful personality where he really could change the direction of things. And the fact that he, had kind of secured his right flank, he had out Zionist the Zionists. Well, yeah, I found that very disturbing. But on the other hand, it's sometimes those people that can actually make a change because they actually are in a stronger position. And I think we saw that at least vis-a-vis Netanyahu in the short run. But as I always pointed out, it's not that Trump is not committed to Zionism. That's the problem. If he actually could take on Zionism, he could be a real he could do some real damage. I think maybe more than anybody, just because the force of his personality and where he's positioned. But I don't see that happening. I just don't see it happening. Unfortunately, he's really totally on board with the Zionist program and with Greater Israel. And his comments about Gaza just make that clear. So, again, the narrative needs to change, but you need some, it may, I don't see any hope of that happening from the top. Maybe there's got to be a change over the generations from the bottom. And we do see those trends taking place again. It's like, I think more than half of the Democratic Party was opposed to, even under Biden. And I imagine it's even greater now that we have Trump in charge. More than half were opposed to supporting Israel in the Gaza campaign. And, though on the Republican side, unfortunately, you didn't see that. Among younger Republicans, there's a growing dissent on the whole question of Israel.